On Christmas Day, my mother stood up from the head of the dining room table, surrounded by 32 relatives, most of whom I only recognized from holiday Facebook posts, raised a glass of the Pinot Noir I'd shipped overnight from a Chicago wine shop, and erased 11 years of my life in under 30 seconds. "I want to make a toast," she said, voice warm and carrying, the voice she saved for an audience. "To the person who has truly held this family together. Wyatt, sweetheart, we would have lost everything without you." My brother sat across from me, grinning, adjusting the sleeve of a cashmere sweater I hadn't given him but almost certainly paid for anyway, nodding slowly like a man accepting a medal he'd actually earned. I set down my fork. The cranberry sauce I'd made from scratch at 5 that morning sat cooling on my plate. "My name is Lorraine Hayes. I'm a nurse practitioner in the emergency department of a Level I trauma center in Chicago. For 11 years, I wired $2,500 back home to Shelby, Tennessee every single month without missing a single payment. That money cleared my mother's mortgage. It kept my brother Wyatt's so-called tech startup afloat, a company he described in fluent investor speak at every family dinner, but never once turned a profit. I was the silent engine behind the leased BMW in the driveway, the kitchen renovation, the new windows, the refinished hardwood floors. I had been listed as an authorized user on exactly 0 of the credit cards my mother and brother carried with my account numbers on them. What I got in return was a toast meant for someone else, delivered with wine I'd paid for, in a house my name was on the deed of. I watched 32 people clink their glasses together. I watched my sister-in-law Justine beam from her seat beside Wyatt like she had personally poured the foundation. I watched my mother dab at the corner of her eye with a linen napkin from a set I'd ordered 2 Christmases ago. I picked my own napkin up from my lap. I set it beside my plate, and I said, quietly enough that only the 4 people nearest me could hear, "That's an interesting version of what happened." My mother turned her head. Her expression shifted the way it always did when I said something that wasn't in her script, that specific combination of warning and wounded dignity she had been pointing at me since I was 16. "Lorraine, just my name, the table went still." "The mortgage on this house is in my name, Mom." My voice stayed level, the same voice I use when I'm explaining something to a patient who doesn't want to hear it. "I've been making the payment for 11 years. I just thought someone in this room might know that." 4 full seconds of silence. Then she said it, loud enough now for the whole room. "You cannot let anyone else have a single moment. This is exactly why you always end up alone. You make everything a transaction." I've held pressure on a man's chest while his heart stopped. I've told families their person wasn't coming home. I have never once cried in a trauma bay, and I wasn't going to cry at a Christmas table. I pushed back my chair, lifted my coat from the back of it, walked to the front door, lifted my keys from the hook beside it. Keys to my 2021 Camry that Wyatt had been driving as his personal vehicle for 8 months since his leased BMW got repossessed in October, and walked out into the cold. The porch steps were salted. My boots hit each one steady and deliberate. Behind me I heard the dining room resume, my mother's voice already smoothing the moment over, the discomfort redistributing until it settled, as it always did, squarely on my absence. I got in my car and drove. My phone buzzed before I reached the end of the street. I turned it face down on the passenger seat. The headlights found the highway and I just kept going. No destination, just distance between me and that table. Somewhere around mile marker 18, a text lit up the screen. I caught it at a red light. "You need to bring the car back. That's my vehicle. Bring it back tonight or I'm calling the police." I held my phone for a moment. The light turned green. I typed 2 words, "Go ahead." Before I tell you what happened in the next 45 minutes, I want you to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from right now. Because what came next, I couldn't have understood it without living through every month of the 11 years that led up to it. Stay with me. I pulled off at a truck stop, got a bad cup of coffee from a machine, and sat in the parking lot with the engine running. The heat barely worked, my hands wrapped around the foam cup. Drive was giving me the one thing grief never could, clarity. I thought about the first wire transfer. March, 11 years ago. I had just gotten my nurse practitioner license and my first real job. My mother called to say the bank had sent a final notice. 2 mortgage payments behind. Wyatt was 31, in the middle of launching his startup, couldn't spare anything. I was 27 with $300 in savings. I put the first $2,500 on a credit card I'd kept for emergencies and told myself it was temporary. 11 years of temporary. I thought about Wyatt at a backyard cookout 3 summers back, standing in the yard of my mother's house, my house, the one with my name on the deed, telling a circle of his friends that he'd kept the family property out of foreclosure through some very tough personal decisions. Said it the way men say things they want credited to courage. I was standing 8 feet away with a paper plate. I didn't say a word. I thought about Justine, Christmas 2 years before that, walking her own mother through the living room like a docent at a museum, gesturing at the renovation I'd funded with 18 months of overtime, saying, "We've really put ourselves into this place. It's become our home in every sense." I'd stood in the kitchen doorway and stared at the floor. And I thought about my mother's phone calls, the ones that always ended the same, regardless of how they'd started, her voice going tight, a pause that lasted exactly long enough to make me feel guilty for the silence. Then, "I just don't understand why doing something for your family is such an imposition to you. Your brother never complains about sacrifice." Wyatt never complained because Wyatt never sacrificed, he received. There's a difference. I was 50 miles outside of Shelby when my phone rang. Unknown number, Tennessee area code, I answered. A Dixon County Sheriff's dispatcher asked me to confirm whether I was in possession of a 2021 Toyota Camry reported stolen by a Wyatt Hayes. I sat up straight the same way I do before I walk into a trauma bay. "This is Lorraine Hayes," I said. "I am in possession of the vehicle. It has not been stolen. I am the sole registered owner. The title, the registration, and the insurance policy all bear my name, and my name only." The dispatcher asked me to hold. I heard keystrokes. I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, photographed the registration and insurance card from the glove compartment, and had both images sent to the non-emergency county email before the dispatcher came back on the line. The scanned title was already in my Google Drive from when I'd financed the car 3 years earlier. I sent that too. "Ma'am, the reporting party is pushing for a felony theft warrant." "Then the reporting party has just committed a felony," I said. "Filing a false police report. I've just sent the title. There is one name on it." A pause. "We'll be in touch, Miss Hayes." I sat on that gravel shoulder in the dark and thought with complete stillness about what my brother had just attempted. A felony charge, my nursing license, gone. 14 years of night shifts, board exams, continuing education hours, clinical hours, incinerated. He had been willing to end my career, my livelihood, everything I had built, to save face in front of our aunts and cousins at Christmas dinner. The anger that came up wasn't hot, it was cold and precise, the kind that doesn't raise its voice, the kind that makes a list. I put the car back in drive and headed north. "I want to ask you something before we go further. Put it right in the comments. If your sibling filed a false police report to have you arrested for taking your own property, what is the very first call you would make? Because your answer to that tells you everything about where you've been standing." I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table in Chicago with my laptop and my credit monitoring app side by side, and I started reading things I had been, deliberately, I understood now, not looking at. 2 credit cards, opened in my name in 2021, both with my mother's Shelby address, a Visa and a store card, combined limit $14,000, combined balance $13,411. I was not an authorized user on either account. I was the account. I called the FTC identity theft hotline at 7 in the morning, filed a police report in Chicago for identity theft by 9:30. By 10 I was on the phone with my bank's fraud division, walking through every account my mother and brother had any access to, and there were more than I'd tracked. The supplemental card I'd added my mother to 4 emergencies had $1,200 in recent charges at a day spa in Nashville and a furniture consignment store I'd never heard of. I had everything frozen, every card, every linked payment, every account. Then I called a real estate attorney. She was efficient and unhurried and very clear. My name was the only name on the deed to the Shelby house. The mortgage had cleared 18 months ago, my payment. The property was mine, free and absolutely clear, and I had the right to reclaim it. She filed the 30-day notice to vacate before noon. 3 days later, I drove back to Shelby. I didn't call ahead. Wyatt answered the door in sweatpants, looked at me for half a second, and started to arrange his face into the expression I'd watched him use my whole life, the one that meant he was about to manage me. I handed him the envelope before he could speak. He opened it. "Read the first paragraph." His face went the color of old chalk. Justine appeared behind him in the hallway. She saw the papers. Her voice came out thin and strange. "What is that?" "A notice to vacate," I said, 30 days. She grabbed the papers, read fast. Her face cycled through expressions before landing on something hot and disbelieving. "Your mother lives here. Where are we supposed to go?" I looked at her. I thought about the tour she'd given her mother through my refinished living room, the words "our home" in her voice. "That's a question for your husband," I said. "He's been describing himself as a successful entrepreneur for 3 years. I'm sure he'll work something out." I walked back to my car. My hands didn't shake once. 2 days after that, they showed up at the hospital. I was coming off a 12-hour shift, still in my scrubs, when the charge nurse texted me. Man and woman at the front desk asking for you. Man was getting loud. Security's already there. I took the elevator down. My mother stood in her good wool coat, Wyatt beside her in the $800 jacket. Security had adjusted his volume. He was standing very still now. I crossed the lobby floor toward them. My mother's face did what it always did when she needed something, collapsed into something that looked like grief and functioned like leverage. Lorraine, baby, this has gone too far. We just need to talk. There are identity theft reports filed with the FTC and Chicago PD with Wyatt's name attached, I said. A detective will be in contact. I'd recommend securing a lawyer before that conversation. Wyatt's voice went flat. You filed identity theft on your own brother. You opened 2 credit cards in my name without my knowledge or consent, I said. That is the legal definition. The law created the charge. I reported it. You're blowing up this entire family over money. No, I said. I'm stopping this family from blowing up my life with my own money. That's not the same thing. My mother reached for my arm. I stepped back, not sharply, just clearly. Everything I did to keep us together. I know, I said. That's the part I think about most, that you believe that. I nodded to security. I went back upstairs. Over the next 3 weeks, Wyatt's life came apart the way things do when they've been held together by borrowed material, completely and fast. The detective made contact. A lawyer was retained. The false police report and the identity theft were both open cases. The credit cards in my name were flagged as fraud, the debt discharged through the fraud process, the creditors redirected to him. He couldn't pay. The BMW went delinquent. The business associates who'd been eating expensive lunches across from him on my accounts stopped returning his calls. Justine left quietly, the way people do when the decision has already been made and they're just waiting on the logistics. My mother found a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Shelby on her own. Social Security and a county pension she'd been collecting for 20 years but never needed to track carefully because my wire transfers made tracking unnecessary. She called me twice in the first month. Both calls were short. She didn't ask for money. That alone felt like something had shifted. The aunt who called to tell me I was destroying the family, I told her I'd redirect Wyatt's portion of my financial support straight to her account, starting immediately, and she was welcome to distribute it however she felt was right. There was a long silence. She said she needed to check something on the stove. She didn't call back. Wyatt showed up at my apartment door on a Saturday night in February. He looked smaller than he had since we were kids. No BMW, no cashmere, a jacket I didn't recognize, eyes that had been up too long. I let him in. I didn't offer coffee. He sat at my kitchen table and stared at his hands for close to a full minute before he said anything, and when he started, his voice broke twice on the way to the point. I told myself I was going to pay it back when the business worked, he said. I told myself you were good at making money and I wasn't, so it evened out. I told myself a lot of things. He pushed his hands flat on the table, but the truth is, I couldn't stand watching you be good at something, anything. You were always better at the hard parts than me, and instead of trying, I just took what you'd already made. Because it was easier than finding out whether I could do it myself. I sat across from him and I listened. I didn't reach for my purse. I didn't move toward him the way I would have 6 months ago, credit card out before he'd finished his sentence. I spent your money on things that made me feel like I was somebody, he said. A leased car, dinners I couldn't afford, a website for a company that had never made $1. He looked up for the first time. I was 43 years old and I had built nothing, and your money was the only thing standing between me and having to know that. I understood, sitting across from him in my kitchen, that every check I had written for 11 years had been doing 2 things simultaneously. It had been keeping the lights on, and it had been keeping him from ever having to find the lights himself. That stops being generosity somewhere around year 3. I'm not going to write you a check, I said. I'm not going to call the bank. I'm not putting anything in your name. He nodded like he had expected that. But I'll do one thing, I said. First month's rent on an apartment in a neighborhood with a reasonable cost of living. 1 month, that's the bridge. After that, you work. Any job. Line cook, warehouse, delivery driver, doesn't matter. You earn your own rent and you feed yourself with your own money. He was quiet for a moment. And Mom? Mom has her apartment and her pension, and she'll be okay. She's tougher than she let herself be when she had a cushion to fall back on. He nodded slowly. Then do you think I can actually do it? I thought about that before I answered. I think you've never had to, I said, so I genuinely don't know, but I think it's the only way you're ever going to find out. He stayed another hour. We didn't talk about the money, the detective, the house, any of it. He told me he'd applied to a restaurant supply warehouse outside of Nashville that had a posting online. I told him that was a reasonable place to start. When he left, I locked the door behind him and stood in my kitchen in the quiet, and noticed that I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little, just tired and clear and ready to sleep. 10 months later, I drove back to Shelby for Thanksgiving. Not to the house, someone was renting it now, a family with 2 kids and a dog, the income going into an account I'd set up to decide about later. I drove to my mother's apartment, a clean place on the east side of town with a small parking lot and a community garden out back that she'd apparently started volunteering in on Thursday mornings. Wyatt was already there when I arrived. He was sitting at my mother's kitchen table in a flannel shirt, and his hands were different than they'd been in February, calloused, the kind of hands you get from actually using them. He was working at a commercial kitchen outside Nashville, long hours, early mornings, consistent pay. He looked tired in a way I hadn't seen from him before, the kind of tired that means you did something real. My mother had cooked. Not catered, not ordered in, she'd cooked. The turkey was slightly overdone on one side. The green beans came from a can because she'd run out of time. The sweet potato casserole was genuinely good. The table was a folding one she'd found at a church sale and covered with a tablecloth she'd had in storage for 20 years. We ate together. It was loud in the small apartment and the folding table wobbled a little when anyone rested their elbows on it, and outside the window, the November dark came in early the way it does in Tennessee. At some point, my mother looked at me and said I was wrong about what I said, about a lot of what I said. She didn't qualify it. She didn't follow it with a but. She just looked at me directly, the way she hadn't in a very long time, and said it simply. I said, I know. That was enough, not because it resolved everything, because it was honest, and we both knew it, and we were still at the table. After dinner, Wyatt and I washed dishes while my mother watched television in the other room. We didn't talk much. The water was hot, the dish soap smelled like lemon, and outside the kitchen window, the dark had settled in completely over the neighborhood. Here's the thing I know now that I spent 11 years refusing to understand. You cannot purchase belonging from people who have already decided you are useful rather than loved. You can only demonstrate, over and over, that your absence costs them nothing. And the moment you make your absence expensive, the moment you take the car and file the documents and walk out of the room, without looking back, you find out very quickly what was real. What was real turned out to be smaller than I expected. A folding table, a slightly dry turkey, 8 words of apology offered plainly without an audience. It was also the first Thanksgiving I had left, without feeling like I still owed somebody something. If any part of this felt like your life, if you know what it is to sign the checks and still be invisible at your own family's table, leave me a comment. Tell me what the turning point was for you, or tell me you're still in it and haven't found one yet. I read everyone. And if you're still wiring money home every month, hoping this month will be the month they finally see you, I just want you to know that the door you are afraid to close is also the door you are allowed to open, on your own terms, whenever you decide you're ready.